We've got to talk about Diane Abbott. I mean, the party's in a bit of a mess over this, aren't they?
Well, Keir's been pretty consistent since Wednesday. He's said that Diane Abbott had the whip back, that no decision had been made. He repeated that
Hold
this
on.
morning.
Has he been consistent? He said today that she's free to stand as a Labour candidate. Yesterday, he said that no decision's been taken. That doesn't sound that consistent.
It sounds as if the decision's been made because there was no decision made on Wednesday, none on Thursday. And in fact, Keir repeated that line to the
He said she's
assembled
been
meeting
blocked
this
earlier this
morning.
week.
When he was asked the questions this morning about 11 o'clock, he repeated that no decision had been made, but at this stage that there was no blocking of Diane Abbott. And of course, a couple of hours later, the decision has been made to allow Diane to stand. And now, hopefully, Diane has said herself on the steps of Hackney Town Hall, I think it was on Thursday night, that she did want to retain being an MP. So we look forward to her being the candidate endorsed by the formal NEC meeting on Tuesday.
So do you expect the NEC to back her then?
Well, the NEC signs off all 650 candidates from all parts of the country. Wherever there's a Labour MP standing, the NEC signs them all off formally as part of the process. I think part of the problem we've had here is the snap election that was called. It all took us by surprise last Wednesday, and that means that special rules come in from the NEC to take control of selections simply because there's no time to go through formal selections through local parties, and that's the process that this has been going through.
I mean, it's made a bit of a mockery of the process, hasn't it? Now that Starmer's decided she can stand, she's allowed to stand. It's basically at his whim.
Well, I don't know if Keir's been involved in the decision-making process at all. I mean, he has said that he was glad that the whip had been restored to Diane Abbott. He's paid tribute to her as being a trailblazing MP, particularly for black women and particularly for black people in terms of becoming an MP and being that trailblazer for the last 37 years, but no decision had been made. And the press frenzy over the last 3 days about whether a decision had or had not been made, Keir has been pretty consistent on that for the last 3 days and has subsequently gone on media this afternoon when the decision had been made that she could stand again and clarified that with the media. So the frenzy around this has been extreme, but we look forward to Diane Abbott's name being on that ballot paper next to Labour Rose come the 4th of July, and if we're all victorious, look forward to welcoming back to Parliament and continue the work she continues to do so well.
What if the NEC say she can't stand?
Well, that's a decision for the NEC in terms of whether I can stand or Keir Starmer can stand and others. But it seems to me that the way the processes work, and I don't fully understand how they work. I haven't ever sat on the National Executive Committee, that they will ratify all the candidates come Tuesday.
All right, what's going on with Angela Rayner? I mean, she was at odds with the party leadership yesterday, wasn't she?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask Angela Rayner that, but the process has always been pretty clear that Diane Abbott had lost the whip for stuff that she had said. There was an independent investigation under the rules of the Labour Party. That investigation concluded. The conditions of that were fulfilled. The whip was restored. No decision had been made about Diane's candidature. Decision has now been made, and we look forward to her standing as a Labour candidate if she chooses to do so.
Why has Diane Abbott been allowed to stand and not Faiza Shaheen?
Well, again, these are decisions that are made by the National Executive Committee. As I understand it, there has been some complaints made about some tweets and other things that particular candidate has done. And it's not just about those two candidates. There have been a whole host of candidates right across the country from all sides of the party that have been denied to stand at the election because of investigations that have been pending or being ongoing. There's Lloyd Russell Moyle in Brighton. There's Graham Jones in Hydeburn, of course, from the incident in Rochdale. So we've concentrated on those two, but that's all part of a process of hundreds of candidates. I think we were nearly 40 candidates short in seats across the country when the snap election was called, and the NEC take control of those processes, and it takes some time for them to be able to come to those conclusions.
I think what some people would say is that Keir Starmer has tried to show that he's changing, detoxifying the party, and at the first bit of pressure in the campaign, he's changed his position very quickly.
Well, he hasn't changed his position. He's been perfectly consistent since Wednesday, saying that no decision had been made. It was the press that said that the decision had been made. It was Diane herself said she'd been barred from standing, and that wasn't what the understanding was that everyone had. That wasn't the case.
Come on, it has been a bit of a mess, hasn't it?
We would rather be talking about policy. We've launched our 6 steps for Scotland for the election today, a down payment on our manifesto, which includes really ambitious plans for GB Energy headquartered in Scotland. I'd rather be talking about that if I'm being completely honest. But the inner workings of the NEC is something that I'm not familiar with. But what happens when a snap election is that the National Executive Committee, the ruling committee of the Labour Party, take control of selections, but they're also responsible for making sure they sign off every candidate to stand in that election, which they will do on Tuesday. Has to happen on Tuesday, of course, because the deadline for nominations is very shortly. Postal votes will be landing on people's doorsteps within the next couple of weeks. So the election is well and truly on. And yes, I'd be rather talking about policy than talking about individuals, but this is the process that has to go through a particularly tough and difficult process when there's snap elections, as we've seen the Prime Minister call last week.
OK, let's talk about policy then. So will Great British Energy generate energy on its own?
Well, it'll do a whole host of things. It'll do everything it needs to do to meet the mission of 2030 clean energy. And it's a really exciting proposition. It'll be headquartered in Scotland. It'll be publicly owned. So any public money that's spent and any profits that are generated will be regurgitated back through for the benefit of the public. It will unleash and give a route to market for many of those big projects, including the upgrading of the grid, which is critical to making sure that we can meet our climate targets, lower bills, and give us that energy security. And critically, in terms of this process of the Green Prosperity Plan and GB Energy, is to provide that just transition away from fossil fuels that people are so desperate for. People want a plan. They want to see tangible efforts from government to show that not only can we meet this clean energy by 2030, but we can create the jobs and the careers and jobs of the future. And that's what this is all about. And it's an incredibly exciting policy that I hope people will embrace and people will vote for.